Hello and welcome to today's episode of Talk on Things and Stuff. Today we're going to have a bit of a guest visit us for the podcast, and that is in the form of Kristie Carlson. Kristie grew up in the church and recently posted on Facebook some of her own sentiments about, to her, what it felt like the messages that Mormonism gave her about who she was as a woman, what was expected of her. And when you read the post, you see just the conflicting narratives that were imposed upon her as a woman, and you get a sense of how it affected her, and not only that, how her departure from Mormonism removed some of the debris of those messages. So I saw the post and I asked her if she'd be willing to come and discuss it. We were able to set up a time for us to meet and to record a discussion that I am going to be showing here over the next hour or hour and a half or so. It might be a little bit longer than that. And so I invite you all to watch the discussion and certainly comment on it as you're going. I think she may be available to see what those comments are live, but certainly could respond afterwards. And then when it's done, we'll open up the phone lines. And if any of you found that her message resonates with you or would like to share your own experiences, then we'll invite you to call and share at that time. So without further ado, here is the conversation between myself and Kristie Carlson, and we'll take it away. Okay, so Kristie, I'm so glad to have the opportunity to talk to you. I was just kind of scrolling through Facebook, and suddenly, bam, this explosive post showed up where it wasn't you sharing it. It was actually somebody else sharing your post. It made such an effect on people that they wanted to share it themselves because it resonated so powerfully with them. And I began reading it, and it's one, every once in a while there's these things that hit you where they really give you a raw exposure to a perspective that there's no way that you can have. And as a man growing up and having the young men and then older men experience in the church, it's so rare for me to get the type of insight that you really just lay out there in your post. So I was wondering at the start of this conversation if maybe you could just give us a brief introduction to yourself so that we can kind of know some of your background, and then a little bit of what went into why you felt the post was something that you needed to put out there.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really honored to be on the show. I just saw someone post this question, what were you taught on how to be a good Mormon woman? And so it was almost just the stream of consciousness. I just started writing and it just all came out, just all at once, just kind of something that I've always had, I guess, in the back of my head growing up because I've grown up in the church. And so I think it was really therapeutic, and it was almost not necessarily, one of the criticisms I'm getting from people who still believe in the church is that, this isn't doctrinal, this is exaggerated, but it's more of the feeling you get, the anxiety, the contradictions, the cognitive dissonance. But I posted it because, this is something I felt. And when you're in the church, you don't get that validation that, something is a little bit off, or you're okay to feel this way. It's definitely something where, other people are going to tell you, try and fix it for you. So I really wanted people who maybe felt this way to feel validated and know they're not alone.
That sounds great. We're going to go into your post really just kind of segment by segment, so any of our viewers who haven't seen it yet can know what we're talking about. Before we do that, for your background, you were a convert or born in the church?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was born in the church. My mom was raised in the church, comes from, pioneer heritage. My dad was a convert, but I was born and raised in the church.
So I can kind of relate to that experience myself. My parents were converts, but I feel, my entire existence growing up was the church. That was my real world reality. And it sounds like for you, the experience was the same, just in terms of, what is reality? Oh, the church is reality.
Yes. Yeah, very much so.
All right. Well, so that we can share with our viewers a little bit of the emotion, the points that you make, let's go ahead and dive right into that Facebook post. And in addition to it being available on your wall and the wall of anyone else who has shared it, I'm with your gracious permission, I've been you've enabled me to post it as a guest post on the blog, Thoughts on Things and Stuff, which we'll put a link to in the YouTube video here and in the Facebook video so people can read it for themselves and share it if they feel so inclined. So let's go ahead and bring that up. Okay, so we've got a guest post here that the title has been given, A Good Mormon Woman. And I would love to hear this if you're willing, if you're just kind of with you reading it paragraph by paragraph, and then maybe if something strikes you as worthy of expanding a little bit, then certainly I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I start out saying I'm writing about my own experience, and my experience is valid because I know that not everybody experiences it the same way. So I'm just trying to say that I'm not trying to say that this is what every Mormon woman experiences, but this is my experience. And to, if you don't want to read it, then don't read it if it offends you. But if you want to read it and understand another perspective, then I think it's good because especially in the church, for me especially, you don't get a lot of other perspectives. I didn't know what it was like, for a mother who had a gay child, or, someone who's a woman who is not married or doesn't have children or something like that. So, so just sharing my experience. So if this is also
I also saw that entry as just a really good way to diffuse some of the common things that immediately get thrown up anytime anyone puts a criticism out. Is like you said, well, I didn't have that same experience. I didn't have it. And you acknowledge at the same time, you're validating those people who may raise that objection, but you're standing your ground and saying, even though you may have had a different experience, this was also my experience and it is no less valid. And so it deserves a hearing. And I thought that was really well stated.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that my experience isn't something that you can say, that's debatable. Is this true or not? That's my experience. So yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, so then I also go in to say, if this is also your experience, you're not alone. It's not you. You're not broken, and you are enough. And I suffered for years with depression and anxiety, and it's all gone now. Do you want me to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that as far as a way to start a paragraph, by starting out with these themes of you're not broken, you're not enough, and I had depression and anxiety, I'm already drawn into the thing. I'm like, because it seems like what you're going to describe are those aspects of Mormonism which led you to feel broken and led you to feel that you were not enough, and that contributed primarily to some of the trials that you had. And when you let go of the supposed truths that feed that idea, then a lot of the trauma seems to disappear.
Yeah, definitely. I was in the church for 40 years. Last year, I started researching the history. And so I left. And when I had that paradigm shift, this mind switch, and it was almost in one day, I look at the research, my worldview switches. All of a sudden, this weight comes off my shoulders, this huge weight of there's no one I have to please. Because that's a big theme, I think, in here is you have to please God, you have to please your husband, you have to please the leaders. There's so much of trying to please that I'm just enough just how I am. And I would never have said in the church or growing up that my depression and anxiety had anything to do with the church. And so it was really interesting for me when I left and that was taken off my mind, how it was immediately gone. So that's what it was from. But that was really interesting for me because I never would have thought that that's where it came from. So maybe subconsciously, I was thinking all these things that I'm posting, but didn't realize until it was over that this is what it was from.
Yeah, I think this speaks directly to a lot of the disconnect that happens when former members discuss things with members, and that is that there are some things that you become able to actually process and consider, once you let go of the supposed truth claims of the church, that as a member in the believing mindset, you never even allow yourself to consider. And you put your finger right on one of those, which is that you're not able to see what happens in the gospel and the expectations of the church as a negative aspect of your life in any way, because the gospel is the whole purpose of life and the source of the purest and most eternal type of happiness. And so you never ever give yourself even permission to consider that what the church demands of you emotionally and just practically in your life can contribute to the negative experiences that you have in that life. But once you let go and you realize that those demands and expectations are this, the product of men creating a religious framework, then you're able to see them as potentially negative in your life. And it's kind of like, that paradigm shift where when you describe, as soon as something happens, like in an instant, it totally changes your perspective. That can be so powerful when that change of perspective allows you to let go of those toxic ideas. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's an experience that I've talked with other women, and they've experienced the same thing. So then I just start with the question, what did the church teach me about being a good Mormon woman? To be a good Mormon woman, you must always be happy and agreeable no matter what. Don't complain, don't question, and do whatever the male leaders say. Do not criticize the male leaders, even if the criticism is true, or the system, or you are a bad Mormon woman. Feminism is definitely evil, and recognizing inequality is also of the devil. So...
Wow.
Yeah.
that is like a lot condensed right in there.
Really, yes. Right. Okay, so always being happy and
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying that theme about always being happy. You have like this plastic smile on your face, and that ties right into this notion of don't criticize the leaders. And that there's that famous quote from, well, a male leader, Dallin H. Oaks, that even if the criticism is true, then you shouldn't criticize the leaders, because your criticism may make it more difficult for them to move forward with the Lord's work. And that idea is so dangerous. And we even have more recently, when the leadership of the Relief Society and the Primary and the Young Women got together, and these are all women, talking about this idea of what do you do when you kind of butt heads with the male priesthood leader. And the message they got is, well, when you think about criticizing them, maybe you should step back and say, wait a second, is it me? Because women's voices can be really shrill. Do you remember that quote, or did you see that?
I do. I did see that, yes.
It's the personification of what you're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. And I go into talking about that a little later too, about it's so interesting that a lot of this criticism is coming from other women. And that's what I experienced in the church. If I ever said, this is unfair, or, there's some sexism in here, it was always the women who were speaking up to correct me. And I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, with the happy and agreeable, I feel like I've moved around a lot, and in a lot of different words, kind of the theme was you can't be real, you just, put on this persona of being happy. Definitely. So,
how does feminism being evil tie into that, whether or not you're able to be real or criticize leaders? Where's the connection between the two?
Yeah, definitely. So if I have a problem with, maybe something the bishop says, then if I go in and tell the bishop, I have a problem with this, I don't think this is fair, then I kind of look like a bad Mormon, like you don't criticize, the bishop is, the mouthpiece of God, and, we don't criticize the church. This is the church of God. And, so, yeah, I felt many times that I couldn't speak up because I didn't want to be seen as, bad, or a problem, or, disagreeable.
It almost seems like, when people think about feminists, a lot of the source in the church, you see them, they've been painted historically as enemies or adversaries, when what they're looking for is a notion of equality between the rights, privileges, and access that men have to women. And so a woman being able to raise a voice that is critical of some decision or policy, where she's able to articulate the reason for that criticism, is not given the same power that a man doing the same thing is. And a man raising an objection may be seen differently, even though I think there's still a prohibition against men criticizing church leaders, because there is a hierarchy of authority, but you're not able to paint them as, oh, an angry feminist. If it's a man, he may just be somebody trying to overstep his priesthood authority.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next section. What do we have next?
Okay, so having sexual feelings, initiating sex, but also saying no when your husband wants sex is bad. A Mormon woman is not a sex fiend. So that's a lot of the messaging growing up. And I talk about on the TV, growing up, if on the family TV, if anything remotely sexual or suggestive comes on the TV, oh, turn the TV up, oh my gosh, or you see something, a billboard or something, everybody turn away, don't look at that, so I got these messages that sex is something to be ashamed of, it's uncomfortable, it's bad, but then all of a sudden when you get married, then sex is okay, so there was definitely a disconnect in the emotions and the psychology of it all. I was definitely sheltered and didn't know anything when I got married, and I feel like that was probably to the detriment, of me, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it is kind of weird, because the thing that you're pointing out, it's not just this super Puritanism. It's like the combination of Puritanism and complete, sex is bad, and then suddenly, when as a woman you have given yourself to your husband over the altar in the temple, because the verbiage of that ceremony involves you giving yourself to him and him taking you. It's not a mutual thing. There's very much a hierarchy there. Well, then suddenly those sexual feelings and those things are now not yours. They're for him to command from you, and your position as a woman, your value as a woman, lies in your willingness and availability to do that. And some of the themes that I think you convey in the paper are that it's almost independent of your own desires or your own timing or things like that. Do you feel like that played a role in it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's a scripture about the natural man as an enemy to God, controlling your feelings and, no masturbation or any kind of sexual feelings that you have. You need to repress those, and they're bad. Or that's the messaging I felt, that's my experience. So I always felt like, that's something you have to repress. That's not a good thing. Subconsciously, that's what I, internalized. So I think even after I was married, there was still this conditioning that, I didn't really realize that I had until I left and had that mind switch. And we started listening to Natasha Helfer Parker's podcast on healthy sexuality. And that's been really good for me to listen to that and to learn what healthy sexuality is, and kind of look at some of the programming and conditioning I was raised with that's unhealthy.
Yeah. The growing up on my side in the male perspective of it, we have sort of this similar thing, but it's I think there's a blind spot from the post-marriage women perspective, because I can remember some of our leaders talking about sexuality. It's always depicted as a beautiful thing, and all of the secular sexuality that you see in the media, that's just an abuse of this beautiful thing. Those are people that are treating it without respect, not understanding how holy it is. And so there's already this air of reverence for it. But then when you get married, it's, they convey to the young men that part of life is to have joy. just like in the happiness letter. And so your sexual life with your spouse is supposed to be joy and fulfillment. You'll even have leaders that say, that's the whole reason that God created a clitoris. A clitoris is not specifically for reproduction, it's for pleasure. And so the fact that that's part of the female anatomy is supposed to tell you that pleasure is part of it. And so you almost have this smugness where you can look out as a Mormon at all these other seemingly puritanical religions that just demonize sexuality, and you can say, well, we understand that sexuality is part of God's plan and it's a good aspect of Mormonism, but this is all taking place in the male mind, and it's not a full picture of sexuality that understands that going into it from the perspective of pleasure from the male perspective is different from what that means for a woman, and that the full picture of sexuality needs to encompass both of those things in that type of relationship.
Yeah, I definitely internalize it too as more of something that's a duty, but also, they talk about it being a beautiful thing, but so many lessons are on repressing it and, waiting for marriage and stuff. So I didn't get a lot of, maybe of all of the chastity talks and stuff, maybe 0.1% was, it's beautiful, what I mean?
I can see that. And the thing is that by raising it on this holy pedestal, I mean, we even have as discombobulating it is, you have President Packer in his terrible voice talking about the sacred powers of procreation. And you're just like, okay, it's sacred and it's holy. And so that almost takes, it's hard. You don't associate feelings of pleasure with things that are sacred and holy, or at least not the same type of pleasure. And so there's this clashing thing. Anyway, it's definitely, when you talk to people who've left the church, a lot of us are really messed up in the area of sexuality because of all of these conflicting messages. And
I
think
definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on that section?
Just to what you just said, there's a few Mormon sex therapists just for Mormons. Like you said, a lot of us are kind of messed up in that area. And so leaving the church and finding, like Natasha has been so helpful. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to kind of get out, the word, that there's these helpers, like Natasha. So
there's some people who've experienced the type of mess upness that we're talking about, because there's different types that I think different ways in which we can have our thinking and assumptions and preconceived notions messed up. And certainly therapists who've dealt with a lot of the different ways can give us new ways of looking for that and approaching those issues. So one thing that you mentioned in the prior paragraph that we didn't get to talk about was that recognizing inequality is of the devil. That's more than just pointed it out. What did you mean behind that? Recognizing inequality is of the devil.
Just that, in the church, nothing is bad. Everything is of God. You can't, look at anything and especially, tell anybody, I think this part of the church is wrong, especially something like inequality. Like if you say, I think the women should have the priesthood or be part of the leadership, you're looked at as someone who, is just prideful and ambitious. And well, this is the way God set up the church. So you should just be grateful for the way that God has set up the church.
Yeah. I think even if a man does it, then, oh, well, you may be accused of being prideful and trying to put yourself before the leaders of the church, the spokespeople for God. But for a woman to do that is, beyond the pale. And it's funny because I think historically women have gone out on that ledge, being willing to be branded a feminist and all the negative implications of that, to do things like to point out that the temple ceremony itself has inherently sexist verbiage, themes, and relationships between the different entities. And for years, women who did that were called feminists and said that their spirit of contention, fault finding, was all the result of pride, And lo and behold, what happens? We see the temple change with those very specific things taken out.
Yeah, it's been a welcome change, that's for sure.
All right, where are we at? Let's see.
Okay, so the next
a
paragraph.
Mormon woman's body is good.
So Mormon woman's body is good. It's a temple, but must never be shown too much because it's bad. Wear the church undergarments to make sure that shoulders and legs do not show because they are bad. Your body is yours, but God, through his male leaders, will tell you what you can or can't do with your body. And what underwear to wear. But it's your body. Do not judge others, but if they aren't dressed according to your standards, they are bad. So look away. So this is definitely a lot of conflicting messages that I got growing up, and it's easier to see once I was out and I had this paradigm shift. I'm 40 years old, a little bit overweight, and when I'm 40 and I leave and I leave this paradigm, it's the first time in my entire life that I actually love my body and that I'm okay with it, shedding all of these messages about my body. And for the first time, I felt like it's my body. I'm in control of my own body. And I guess before I was, wearing garments and doing these things to please God, but then all of a sudden it changed and I saw it as, these men are just telling me what to do with my body, and I don't think that's right.
It's interesting because I think people who would want to criticize your perspective here would say that the whole notion that you have to cover up your body isn't a message that your body is bad. It's just acknowledging that your body can lead men to have thoughts that are inappropriate, or it can normalize things, for example, for children that would then lead to sin in the future. Like, how do you pick apart that type of criticism, or how would you respond to that?
I don't think I can try and unless you are willing to have more of an open mind and understand why someone feels the way that they do, you can't really understand, so I don't try and try and make someone understand, and I don't think I would have understood until, I realized, okay, the church isn't true. And just looking at things for what they are and saying, they're telling me even how many earrings I can have in my ears, and it should be something now where I see, a woman should wear what they're comfortable with, and nothing is like, oh, that's bad if you, wear shorts that are shorter and I feel comfortable in something that's longer. It's not something where you can't do that, that's bad to do that, to wear short shorts or something,
So it's kind of like where the decision and the values are all centered within the woman herself and what decision she's making. And she's making it based on her own priorities, not based on a set of rules or expectations that are handed to her from some false authority.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
The, the whole, because it's interesting to hear that the message that you got growing up was that your body was bad, when, I don't know, I'm just trying to step back and see about what are the messages that could go into that. And the things that come to mind are what you alluded to before, was that there's this notion that there's the carnal mind or the natural man, and it's this thing of flesh. And so things pertaining to the natural man are inherently bad. And that could be, we're kind of told that there's this elevated spiritual body that we'll eventually have that doesn't necessarily have to consume food or anything like that. And so all of those things that are directly addressing the natural state of our organic bodies are inherently bad or worldly or almost like telestial, because that's, the telestial world that we're going to be in. But then on top of that, you've got these, if it is that the sight of an ankle or a knee or a shoulder is going to introduce bad thoughts into righteous priesthood holder minds, well, then that puts you on the side of the devil, someone who is tempting people, just as much as we're shown in the temple ceremony that the tempter, the person who tries to entice people to step away from God's commandments, there's very much a side that you're on if you're doing those things, and it's not God's side.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, no one said your body is bad, but that's kind of the cognitive dissonance I was trying to maybe portray here, is that they said, oh, yes, your body is very good. It's a temple, but the messaging, you need to cover up your body, or, girls camp, you have to have your shorts down to your knees. So a couple people aren't doing that. So now we all have to wear pants. It's like, very much focused on covering up your body and, suppressing your natural body. And what they say isn't necessarily, what's actually happening and what they're saying,
Yeah. It's almost like there's a subtext in everything that they convey, which affects you on a very, very fundamental level, even if it's like not a literal statement of what they say, but it conveys a subtext that really does affect you.
Yeah,
okay,
definitely.
what about the judging part of it, where it's not just like what you're looking at yourself, but how you perceive others?
Oh, yeah. I never thought that I was a judgmental person until I left the church. And all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I was a judgmental person, because you think there's a universal standard and people are either living up to that universal standard or not. And now I just see, people are wearing what they're comfortable with, and that's okay. And that's not bad or good. That's just, how it is, So, and definitely, maybe even growing up, maybe some of this is my family or something, but there would be, maybe people pointed out in public who would, oh, look at her. Oh my gosh, can you believe what she's wearing? And kind of this air of disgust at a woman who would, reveal too much of her body.
Yeah, I think there's like elements of normal human interaction that happen. You'll hear even, movies where in high school or junior high, girls that aren't tied to any religion, but like, oh my God, did you see what she's wearing? But all of that is because there's these sets of rules, of expectations. In junior high, it may be what's cool and what's not cool, what's outdated. But to the extent that you have a list of rules that you can then judge people by, it's an invisible air that you breathe that you can't escape. Even if you have this notion that, well, Christ says we shouldn't judge, so we're not going to judge. But the fact that you have these rules makes it impossible for you to, when you see something that violates those rules, not be aware of that violation, and it colors subconsciously how you treat those people. And
yes, definitely.
And I found that affected me. And when I heard you say, you didn't realize how judgmental you were until you left the church, I had the exact same experience, because I didn't think I was judgmental. I was just like, I'm just looking at the world through what I understand the truth to be. But it's like, compare that, where you've got all these arbitrary standards that you can then be aware that people are violating, with growing up with this notion that, as long as people aren't hurting other people, then there's a wide degree of freedom that people have to make choices for themselves. And it's a very different type of approach to the world and other people.
Oh yeah, definitely. And you're taught that you have the truth and you're supposed to share it with other people. And so, oh man, if they only had to have the truth, and you all, I don't know if it was just me, or they talk about missionary work. And so I would see someone and think, maybe God put this person in my life in my path to teach them about the church or something. So you're always viewing it as they need something from me. Yeah. I have something, I'm special.
Yeah, which implies that there's something lacking in their life, and that you can be an agent in giving it to them.
Yeah.
And it really does color the way that you look at the world around you. Absolutely. All right, where are we at?
I think it's the next one. Tell your children to never look at those bad body parts. And TV, if anyone is immodest or is suggestive in the slightest, you must turn it off, because sex is bad, next to murder even, unless you're married, in which case it's good, but not too much. You shouldn't enjoy it or have sexual feelings. But always say yes to your husband, and be skinny and attractive to him, while always wearing your garments night and day. Be a good wife, or he will leave you, because your worth is in being a good wife and mother. So the last sentence, nowhere in the church, do they teach you have to be a good wife, or your husband's going to leave you, but there's definitely this, pleasing people and earning your worth, and you have to be good enough. And, if you're not good enough, then, you're not going to make the standard, or, God isn't pleased with you, or, this person isn't pleased with you if you don't reach this standard.
The the whole thing about if you're not good enough, your husband will leave you. I agree with you that it's not really explicitly taught in the church, but when you talk to people who are in mixed faith marriages, when suddenly there's this disparity between the husband and the wife and their attitude and relationship to the church, then that message suddenly starts to come out in some subtle or not so subtle ways.
Yes, definitely.
I used to think that it was mostly just men leaving the church because they were online, but there are so many women now who've done their own research, in many cases fueled by this lingering sense of injustice and sexism that they start to realize. And then particularly when they study polygamy, they become dissatisfied with Joseph Smith as the founder and start to air those criticisms. And suddenly their husband is talking with the bishop. My wife doesn't believe, she's not, she's not wearing her garments anymore. Well, the idea then is that, well, you need to have an eternal companion for whom you can have an eternity with. And if they're leaving the church, that's no longer an option. And I think that messaging is stronger when you flip the genders in that, because of the inherent sexism of marriage, where a man can be sealed to multiple women, whereas a woman only has the opportunity to be sealed to one man. And that relationship, that sealing, is their key to heaven and the eternities. And so it's a much more powerful lever and influence, I think, in the mind of a faithful woman who has a husband who's left the church than it is on the other way around.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a problem with conditional love in the church. Yeah.
One of the things that comes to mind is in one corner of the activism that I've done, I've dealt with a lot of people who have had to deal with infidelity on the part of his spouse. And this message that you have written there about, if you're not good enough, he will leave you, that message invariably comes up when a partner in a relationship has cheated. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily come up from the cheater. It comes up in the mind of the person who's trying to make sense of, why did my husband or my wife cheat on me? Mm-hmm. And it's something that you then pound on your own mind about. I must not have been good enough. I must not have been, I have to make sense of this. It can't be that mm-hmm. they're just entitled narcissists who don't consider my feelings. It's just, I'm not good enough. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it's weird to see that thread in amongst all of these other things about wearing garments and everything. But when you talk to some women that, and in particular, who've had their spouse cheat on them, in some cases they'll say that they didn't feel sexy enough. Maybe they weren't being sexy enough for their husband because they had to wear garments all the time. It's all kind of in that mix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
It's just part of the messed up existence that Mormons kind of have to navigate with all of these.
Yeah, I felt like taking my garments off was a huge thing for me. It wasn't as much for my husband, but I think that has been a common theme when I talk to other women who've left, that not wearing garments has actually been a huge thing emotionally. So I definitely think that's something to
how big of a step was it? Like, there's one thing, it's like, okay, I remember, it's like, I'm not going to go to church, and I'm okay with that. I'm not going to go to church this Sunday, and I'm not going to feel guilty about it. And it's like a step that you go through. It's a little step. But then that step where you're like, I'm taking off my garments, and that is like a huge, a bigger step, I think, because we're told that putting on the garment and wearing it is an expression of your devotion to God. It's a physical manifestation of a covenant that you made to God. So you promised something to God, and now you are betraying the promise you made to God. And it's like, it's so much more weighty. And but then to have that tied in with how it has, as you say, it sounds so trite, but having the church choose your underwear is
Yeah.
like a really intimate invasion into your life.
Hmm.
And I think particularly in our culture where, you know, there's this cartoon that I don't know if you've seen, and it's a young woman, and there's this notion that if you have cute panty and bra set, then it's secret happy, secret cute, secret happy. So even though everyone else would just see her, the fact that she was able to choose panty and bra that she thinks are cute, it's like a source of happiness for her. Whereas
Yes,
if she has to
that's
choose
true.
ugly bra, ugly panty, then it's like secret sad. Like everyone else would see her, but she perceives it as sad. I'll see if I can find the screenshot for that. But it's one of those things where those personal, intimate choices play into how you feel about yourself because it's part of, you know, the side of yourself, your private self that you get to choose for yourself. That not only that, you get to then it's part of your intimate connection with other people. If they ever get close enough to you where they see that aspect of you, then that's something very special that you get to be the gatekeeper of yourself.
Hmm.
And then, but the church is inserting itself in that very intimate aspect of an individual's life.
Yeah, and
So
that's where I get this idea that, my body isn't mine because they're choosing so many things. And like you said, it's very invasive when someone else tells you what underwear to wear. But, I had that mindset where you're saying before, this is something I'm choosing because it symbolizes, a promise to God. But then when you have this mind switch and you realize that's not what it really is, and, learning more about the history of the temple and how it was started and everything, it became something where, oh my gosh, this is really just someone trying to control my body and telling me what to do with my body. So for me, I know everybody's different, but it was almost like I couldn't, throw them away fast enough, So as soon as I had this mind switch, I was like, I want nothing to do with any of this, and trying to take my own authority back and feeling like I'm in control of me now. No one else is going to ever be in control of me anymore. So it was very, I felt so free, when I had this mind switch and was able to say, this is my body now, and no one's going to control it. No one's going to control my mind or tell me what God wants for me anymore.
it occurs to me that the messaging that you received growing up, informing you that the nature of your relationship with the church and the reasons that you're wearing those garments and the covenant you made, there's so many hours spent indoctrinating you with those ideas that it's really hard to simply just say, oh, I don't believe it. I mean, I think anyone who has only been exposed to the indoctrinated side, who then hears you say this, is going to be like, well, how in the world could you just decide in a blink of a moment that the church was false and all of those covenants were made
Oh,
up?
it wasn't. Yeah, I definitely, if I was seeing this, a couple of years ago, I would have, had a heart attack that this is me, who I am now, But it took 8 years from when I first heard the Fanny Alger story and realized, things aren't really what they seem. There's some hidden things here, and starting that cognitive dissonance to the slow decline. And I think, and then I heard the Book of Abraham, stuff, and hearing little bit more. I had this programming that you can't ever leave the church or you're a bad person. And I think once I could get rid of that, then I could just finally let go. But it's so hard to just let go, I think. And so when I was finally just ready to let go, then then it was like a switch flipped. But it took 8 years before I could get to that point.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time to detangle those indoctrinated messages. And I remember myself feeling a lot of fear and anxiety over what if I've been deceived and all these things but really that just, for me, it motivated me to study more because I knew that it was only through learning more that I could actually feel more confident in whichever direction I was able to go. All right, let's see where we are. Let's see here. Tell your children to never look at those bad body parts. So this whole thing about the media, I can remember growing up and being warned about not just like hardcore pornography, but just like television shows that treated sacred things lightly. And like if you watched Ally McBeal or Seinfeld or something, they talked about sex in ways that were inappropriate and things like that. Like, how strong was that messaging for you?
It was very strong. And I think in our family, it was also very strong. I know every family has different standards and things, but it was definitely something that we had a very high standard of media in our house. So I almost got this conditioning that, if they show any kind of physical affection, that it would make you uncomfortable and to turn it off, so definitely feel like part of being a good Mormon person was choosing not just good media, but like maybe, extreme. That was my family. But I think, in the opposite direction, you can definitely go in the opposite direction. I know that there's a lot of research on, maybe violence in the media or in video games and things. So I think, there has to be a happy medium. But I think now the message that I'm trying to tell my kids is not, oh, this is bad and hurry and we have to turn off the TV or like I mentioned before, look at that person who's, not fully covered, definitely a different way to look at it.
Yeah, it seems like for a lot of people that leave the church, I don't know, there's this stereotype, I think, of people that leave the church and suddenly they have no morals, nothing's grounding them at all. When objective morality disappears, then everything is permissible. And so we get accusations thrown at us that we're somehow participating in grossly immoral things by their standards. Have you found that you have a moral framework for how you view the world, how you view sexuality, even though you've left the church, and what has helped you to develop that?
Oh, definitely. I'm glad you asked this question because I think that's one of the biggest things. Now that I look at it, I feel like the church focuses more on these arbitrary, are you wearing your garments or are you drinking coffee and tea, which have absolutely nothing to do with being a good person. I don't, other than are you being honest, in the temple recommend interview questions, they don't ask you anything about like, the things I think of being a good person now, which is, how do you treat other people? Even things about the environment. I now believe that protecting the environment is part of my moral standards, so I've been able to, once what was given to me is kind of taken away, I was very deep into what does it mean to be a good person and what are my standards. And I think that's been really great because now I can think for myself. And I think that's been really great for my kids to see too, because now I don't have a set of standards handed to me. Now we have to think for ourselves, and it's more, hopefully my kids internalize it more, it's something that's their own and their own choices. Now it's more on research. So I mentioned that we were listening to the Healthy Sexuality podcast and finding out, the research. And I still, for me personally, I don't watch rated R movies because that makes me uncomfortable, but I don't now, judge anybody for watching something that maybe I don't think is good. But now I think of it as everybody has their own standards for what they are comfortable with. And it doesn't make them a bad or a good person, but I definitely want to be a good person. I think even more now than I was in the church, because now I'm thinking, what does it really mean to be a good person and it has nothing to do with what underwear you wear or the coffee or tea that you drink.
All right. Thanks for sharing that. Let's see where we are in our blog post. Suffering.
If you aren't enduring suffering, you aren't doing enough, but you'll never be enough. But you must always smile and be happy, even if you are suffering, and you must be perfect. If you're not a good wife, your husband will leave you, and your worth is only in being a dutiful wife and mother. If you don't do the duties of wife and mother, which include doing the housework, always being happy, and being perfectly patient with your children, while always using that nauseating voice the women use in conference talks, then you are not enough.
Okay, now this is squarely focused in on some of the, I think, the pressures that only women could feel in the church. How powerful were these influences, in your Mormon mother wife mind?
Yes, there were a lot of lessons in Relief Society on how to be a good mother, and maybe not even the doctrine of the church that says you have to do these things, but it was more implied, and these type of people were held up as the standard. A lot of this was maybe just implied things, and I talk about the women who talk in conference. As a kid, I couldn't relate to those women, and other than Sherry Dew, there were no women that portrayed this, strong sense of confidence and said things of, I'm not going to say they didn't say things of substance, but they didn't say anything that really caught my attention, except for Sherry Dew. But unfortunately, she was only there for a short time, and then she's gone. But I think that's why people really gravitated towards Sherry Dew, is because it was finally somebody held up that we could relate to, that we could look towards, and who was confident and spoke with power and intelligence, and didn't have that sweet kind of voice that you hear in conference that I couldn't relate to.
Yeah, I think particularly if you just compare like the most authoritative voice, like have Dallin H. Oakes, who says things like, the Lord has said this and this, and he does it because he has training in radio speech. And so particularly if you listen to his early talks, he like has this really powerful declarative voice. But then you listen to the Relief Society president and it's, this is the way that things are, and we do this and that. And, listen to who they quote. The Relief Society presidents generally quote male authorities when they want to give an authoritative thing. They don't speak of the truths taught by other women to the extent that they do reference men.
Yeah, that's what I mean by they didn't say anything of substance. I don't mean they didn't say anything of substance. What I mean is just what you said. If you're going to quote somebody, it's going to be a male person for the most part. Yeah.
And that's because that's where the authority is, because the authority gives legitimacy to anything that you might say. And so if you're going to quote someone, you have to quote someone whose things that they say are legitimate. And that can only be men because they are the only ones with the priesthood.
Yeah.
And so you replace priesthood power with legitimacy in an argument. So they don't even have to be legitimate in what they say. All they have to do is have the priesthood.
Yeah.
Now, it seems like if you aren't enduring suffering, you aren't doing enough, but you'll never be enough. How powerful an influence was this notion that you have to suffer in
that was definitely something that wasn't taught. You don't have to be taught specifically that this is a doctrine that you must suffer, but that was definitely something that was held up as a standard. Like the stories that were told were about the women who pressed on even though they had cancer, but they still were the Relief Society president. They wanted to be released, but the bishop said no, keep going, and she kept going. Those kind of things where the woman had 10 children and she still was able to do her visiting teaching and her, this and that. And those were the stories of the heroes, the standards and the messaging that I got.
How did this intersect with the feeling that you started your article and essay about not feeling like you were enough?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things I felt contributed to the anxiety and the depression was never feeling in a spot where I am good enough right now as I am. And there's always something more to work towards. There's always, ways you could be better. And not to say that now I don't want to be a better person and, work towards being a better person, but it's now comes from a place of I am enough right now, how I am. And then I want to be a better person because I want to, not because I'm trying to please God, or I have to, enter the temple, or I have to, someone else's external standards saying that I'm not enough.
The sensation of kind of toxic perfectionism that goes along with perpetual inadequacy that I know as a man I felt, I can only imagine is much more magnified when you have all these external expectations as a woman. I've noticed, I don't know how much attention that you've paid to conference in the past years. For some people like myself, conference suddenly gets way more interesting, and I probably pay more attention than my family. But I've noticed, particularly in Holland and Uchtdorf, they seem to trying to be correcting this or attempting to correct this by, and it's funny, the way that they tell women and men that they shouldn't have those feelings that you're talking about, inadequacy, is simply telling them they shouldn't be feeling inadequate. You're enough. And so
yeah,
it's almost like rather than fixing the problem, they're just telling people you shouldn't feel inadequate. The gospel is enough. Christ's sacrifice is enough. You should be feeling that. And so it's suddenly like, great, I should be feeling adequate, but I don't feel inadequate. I feel so inadequate.
Yeah, you're inadequate because now you don't even feel like you're supposed to. So you're broken because you're not enough. Yes.
It's to me, it's like they don't understand the fundamental source of those feelings of inadequacy.
Yeah, definitely.
Which, if they would just read an essay like this, they could identify a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, it says in the scriptures, to be perfect, but then they say, but not in this life, you don't have to be perfect now. But there's a quote that says, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be a little bit better each day, which is almost like, every day you have a new thing, you have to get better. You're always trying to be better and you're never arriving. And, I wanted to be a good person so badly, and not just a good person, but I wanted Heavenly Father to be really proud of me. And I was always working for that approval. And I think that's where I get some of the, I have to get my husband's approval, and I have to get the approval of the bishop, and I have to get, you're trying to earn your approval and work for your worth.
Yeah. Well, it's conveyed very powerfully in your essay here.
Oh, thanks.
Let's see. It's funny that you bring up, you must always smile and be happy, even if you're suffering. The very last Sunday school lesson I went to, which kind of was the nail in the coffin for me, was this lesson where it was about how when we're out in public, and this was told to the membership in general, and so I can understand how women would feel a great deal of pressure for it, which is you have to put on a happy face, and you have to, because people might be judging the church by how you're doing. And so you've got to be happy. And even if you're having a hard time and a tough day, you've got to just show that you are, totally on board. And it was I felt like it was a message of we've got to be fake.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's not necessarily something that's taught outright, but it's something that you definitely learn in the culture. Even, I guess it is taught outright in that Sunday school lesson. But yeah, you are the example. You are the light to the world. You're responsible to be, for being the example and sharing this, knowledge that we have, this happiness, definitely you can't be real.
It's been such a transition for me just because it goes from, there's this real strength, I think that's tied into the American origin of the church, where it's like, you're pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, you're going to muscle through, and you're going to, solve all your challenges, you're going to dominate your challenges, and you're going to do so with your back straight and your head held high, and it proves your inner worth and personal strength. And so on top of being fake, or this idea that you have to be fake, it's like your strength, your inner strength as an individual is reflected on how well you deal with this suffering and do it with a smiling face. And I think for me that fed into the feeling worthless, is because like I wasn't that good at doing that. And and who is? I don't
Yeah.
know. It always seems, that's the other thing, is that I would look out at all these other shiny, perfect, happy Mormon people, and they're all doing it, and I'm not.
Yeah, you think, everybody around you is perfect because that's the, what you're supposed to portray, and then you find out, oh wait, they're not really how they're, being portrayed. But yeah, there's this, endure it well.
I always loved finding out how broken people were.
It's kind of therapeutic, right?
I know, and I would feel so guilty for feeling that Schadenfreude, but now that I'm out of the church, I'm Schadenfreuding it up left and right.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going.
Okay, where are we? Do everything asked of you, and if you can't, you will feel guilty and shameful and not enough. The basics are callings, mothering, housework, visiting, teaching, feeding the missionaries, FHE, personal and family scripture study, prayers, morning, before meals and as a family before bed, and personally before bed, making meals for others, making meals for funerals, going to all the meetings for church and your calling, visiting the temple often, and doing missionary work and family history work. Those are the basics. Do not complain when you must do all of this while your husband is at work or spending all of his free time with his calling. And for sure, you must clean the church building on Saturday with a smile on your face, even if you can't keep up with your own housework and feel like a failure because you aren't doing enough and you're not being a good Mormon wife, so your husband can leave you, but always smile.
Oh.
So much of my own experiences in that, like feeling like, my husband was in the young men's presidency, and he was putting his all into it and doing these campouts and these service projects, and like, I'm stuck with all the housework and all this, I don't have him there. And then on Saturdays, they want us to clean the church building. And I was so frustrated because here my home is a mess, and I'm really frustrated because I can't keep up and feel like I have to earn my husband's approval. But I'm spending my Saturday, cleaning the church building. And that was always just, I felt like it was too much. Always. It was just always too much. Yeah. And you could never say no. There's no such thing as, sorry, yes, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, are you being prideful this week?
Yeah, there was no saying no, but that's one of the things that I've learned after leaving the church is how to set boundaries and saying no. And I've gained like so much more confidence and been able to actually set boundaries. And, it's been wonderful.
Before, if you, found yourself having to say no, you would be racked with guilt.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That you'd had to do that, even if you, at your very extreme had to do it. Whereas now you could say no and hell no.
Yeah.
And it's like, you don't have to feel guilty about that. And it is so empowering.
It is very empowering. When I had my mind switch and I decided to resign from the church, and I sent an email to my bishop saying I'm going to resign from the church, and he asked if he could meet with me. And I said, no, thank you. And I felt so free. I was like, exactly. No, I don't want to. And you have no power over me, and I have no guilt about that.
Yeah. The list of things that you put here, I think particularly because women growing up in the church have really been stuck in this 1950s housewife mindset. So that I think a woman who's grown up in a more secular perspective might look at this list and be like, why are you doing all this stuff yourself? This is all the things that couples together do.
Because he's off doing his calling, Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And my husband is really good. I have a really good husband about this kind of stuff. He helps me all the time. But I mean, if you see that list, there's always something you're not doing. And that's another thing of this, you're never going to be enough because you really can't do that whole list. And even if you try, you really can't. And I was always like, I don't know, even if we tried, I felt like, oh my gosh, we're praying all the time. I don't even have anything more I can pray about, It's almost like if you did try and do all of that stuff, you had no time for anything but church stuff, I don't know.
No, and the thing is, that's a very common theme in groups that keep their members so busy with tasks that they don't have time to sit back and say, wait a second, is there some purpose to all of this stuff? Are these demands based on any real legitimate authority? Do these men actually speak for God? If you never get a chance to slow down and ask those questions, you'll never get off that treadmill.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it was very good for me for this deprogramming stage to be away from the church. And that's kind of what I wanted for my kids and my family. We all said, I left the church first, and we wanted all of our kids and my husband to make his own choice about the church. But I think it's really important just to separate yourself for a little bit and to be able to separate your thoughts from the thoughts that you're told to have.
Yeah. The point that does come up in several paragraphs here is, if you're not good enough, your husband will leave you. And that is a message that you can find in abusive relationships, regardless of whether they're part of this church or any other church. And there's a fear in there. There's a self-recrimination in that. To what extent do you feel like that message is part of Mormonism, and what do you think fuels that fear?
Well, I think, as I said, you're earning your approval, you're earning your worth. But also, especially for the women, it's so ingrained that your worth is based on being a wife and a mother. And so if your husband leaves you and you have a failed marriage, I mean, nothing else matters. You failed at the most important thing in your life. And so, you're the biggest failure, is how I guess subconsciously was thinking about this, that I could never let my marriage fail, because that would be just the biggest failure of anything.
And so it doesn't have to, well, I guess I want to draw the line between, I think that there are some men in the church who accept in their mind that the worth and value of their wife is tied up in those tasks, because they see that as the parallel worth and value to their own tasks. As a man, my value is tied into how well I fulfill my calling, how worthy I am as a priesthood holder, and how much order I conduct my household in. And so the church has said that women and men are the same, but with different roles. So now let me take that value judgment and transpose it to the women roles. And so now, how well my wife maintains the household, has meals ready for me, keeps things clean, keeps the children in line, does all of these womanly things, is how she defines her worth. And if I'm doing all heck good in my worth, but she's, I have to step over piles of laundry and crap, well, then she's not living up to her thing. And I feel like there are some priesthood men who take that judgmental attitude and perspective and may apply it in their family, because they're given the tool set to do that from within Mormon teaching and culture and doctrine.
I've heard so many stories, of that exact thing.
From women who it's not so much that they're judging themselves by this, but they understand that that's how their husband views the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
what is it like to, it's one thing to live under a self-imposed notion of worthlessness, but to live in a relationship where that dynamic is understood has got to be something different altogether.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to make it clear that my husband never portrayed this to me. This is something, whether for my upbringing or the church, this is something I had in the back of my mind, that, I had to do these things. But my husband is great. And none of that came from him, but it was more, this is something I felt.
Okay, let's see. Where are we at? Let's see. We did
get an education. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Get an education. It's not like we're in the 1950s. Women should get an education, but not use it except to educate their children. And even if we're now in a society that almost demands a 2-income home, you must stay home, have a big family, and never get in debt. But pay your tithing first. Always pay your tithing before you pay for your food and home. If you pay for your food or home and do not pay your tithing, you are bad. You will feel shame and guilt. You may not enter the temple, and you will not be a forever family. With your extra money, pay generous fast offerings, save for your son's missions, and build a food storage.
So this, I think, has affected a lot of women, in some cases much more powerfully than I had ever imagined. To me, this was really brought home. Recently, I watched this Netflix miniseries called Unorthodox, I think. And it's about,
I've seen it.
Did you see it? Do you see like this concept of the women not having had an education and how that contributes to them being trapped was really powerful. Do you see that in any of your own personal experience or those of others who've left the church?
Well, yeah, I definitely hear, my Facebook groups, a lot of women regret staying home because they didn't feel like they had a choice, and they think, well, what would I have done if I didn't have this messaging and I could have chosen, maybe I would have chosen a career, and they feel this regret. I personally, I did choose to get a master's degree, and I don't regret that at all, even though it caused our family more debt. That's something that, I wanted to do, and so I don't have regret in that way. And then I did stay home with my kids just because I wanted to. I don't feel that personally, but that's definitely the messaging. But I think that's one of those contradictory things. Like they say, get an education, now it's, we're progressive. We think our women should get an education, but then they're saying, but don't use it, stay home. And there's definitely a pressure now in these, they don't get into debt, but then, there's so many demands now, and the cost of living is so high that it's just really hard to do all of that in that paragraph.
No, exactly. And in some cases, they don't even have to say that you must stay home. All they have to tell you is that God's greatest purposes are in the righteous rearing of children, and no success in the workplace could ever compensate for failure in the home. And the mothers are the nurturers. And all of those messages in total equals, if you don't stay home and anything bad happens in your family at all, well, then you are the one who should accept the blame for that. And so that head of pressure is a huge weight to carry around your entire life.
Yeah, definitely. And to the money part of it, I have 2 teenage sons, and I just felt like, paying tithing, paying the fast offering, and then having to save up for 2 sons' missions. I'm like feeling this, big pressure, and I don't know. I just don't think that's fair.
Yeah, well, I think particularly in light of the church having over $100 billion in stockpiled funds and still making these demands, particularly in light of, when the mission presidents go out, they are told that they don't have to pay tithing and that all of their necessary expenses are provided for. And in a leaked document, it itemized what those necessary expenses were, which if we all then apply that to our necessary expenses after which we pay tithing, it's like a housekeeper, a gardener, a cooker, a chef, auto expenses, health insurance expenses, child college expenses. Like, okay, we'll just take all of that out of your income, and then whatever you have left over, pay 10% of that. And nobody's doing all those things in the first place, but this is what we're providing church leaders. I mean, there's just such a double standard in how the leaders take things and how members have this imposed on them. And it's brought into stark contrast when we're told, as you correctly put out here, that, payments of tithing to the church should supersede your food, your rent, because then you could ask the church for help in that. But that gives the church
and you don't always get that either. And then you're, you're embarrassed by asking, this bishop if you can have money. It's just, that's the only thing. When people ask me if there's anything I regret or I would do over again, that's the only thing me and my husband say is we wish we would have taken the money that we paid into tithing and put it towards a charity that was, doing good for people here and now. That's the one thing I wish we could have done differently.
All right, where are we at? Let's go. Let's see.
Yes, you will suffer, but you must endure the suffering, because a Mormon will always suffer, because happiness is only for the next life. But always smile. You're an example for the world, because we have the truth with a capital T and must show others that we are so happy to be the lucky ones. Be nice and helpful and serve others and coerce them to be Mormons, because if you even bring just one person to God, your joy will be immense in the next life. You're responsible for others' salvation, eternal salvation. And being a good wife and mother means your husband and children stay faithful to the church, not God, because the church is God. So it must be the church. You can't still have God and leave the church. So that's one thing I definitely noticed. Now, being out of the church, is that everything was loyalty to the church, the organization. And they teach you that the church is God. This is God's church, and God is telling you to do all these things. But now I see it as, you can have God if that's what you want outside of the church, but they definitely don't teach you that in the church. And it's not a loyalty to God. It's you have to be faithful to the church and stay in the church. And it's the organization, not God. That's how I see it now.
And it's one of those things where when you're in it, that's just, of course, that God's purposes are manifest through the church. He's at the head of the church. Why would anyone even question that notion? And so it doesn't even strike you as odd when you're in the temple and you're swearing to give everything that you are now or ever will be or have to the building up of the kingdom of God, because the kingdom of God is the church and the church is the kingdom of God. It's the same thing. And it's just when you step outside of that and you see how exploitative that relationship is, and how the only reason that you accept any of those things is the notion that these men speak for God. And if you take that one peg out, then everything else is completely manipulative and abusive.
Yes.
One of the things that you wrote here, you are responsible for others' eternal salvation.
Yes, and definitely. I've learned a word called codependency since I've left. And yeah, that is definitely something I had to, I talked about setting boundaries and things. And that's definitely led to me having more confidence, is that I'm not responsible for other people. Especially as a mother, maybe your success as a mother is, if your kids grow up and do the checklist, go on a mission, get married in the temple, and stay faithful in the church. And you're definitely always trying to keep them on the covenant path and to fit this mold as well. Like my teenage son came home with fingernail polish on one day, and now I'm like, everybody should be their authentic selves, and I celebrate any kind of diversity, and that's fine. But before, it's like, you have to stay in this mold, and everybody must be in this mold. And codependency.
It's funny because for me, when I read that, it seems almost like a contradiction with the notion that, we're going to be punished for our own sins and not for others' transgressions. And so we're not responsible for anybody else's sins, which should imply that, it's not our responsibility to save them. And yet you have this really strong push on temple work and family history work with the notion, and they've said this, that you're going to be saviors, to these people because you're doing work for them that they can't do for themselves. And so, I think I got out kind of at that front end of this huge, tremendous push on family work, where I was already feeling overwhelmed and inadequate by all the things they expected of me. And now if you take like the most boring stuff that we used to do, family work and genealogy, and then make that also tied into my, feelings of worthlessness, I'm supposed to be doing more of this stuff, more indexing. and
Yes,
I'm
definitely.
not. And so no, I just like feel even more worthless. It's just like another button that they can push to control me and to make me feel worthless. And
Yes,
when I say
definitely.
worthless, the other side of that is I'm more dependent on them to try to overcome my feelings of worthlessness. I don't know if you felt
Yes.
that cycle in your own experience.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, they make you they tell you that you're broken and that they are the only ones that can save you from being broken. So you're, dependent on this organization.
I think I hear a four-legged
Yes,
fluffy person. He's like, oh, have you got a microphone here? I'm going to breathe into it.
He always likes to be with me, and he's not getting attention, and so he wants to.
Oh, well, you got to give him some cuddles there. All right, where are we at? Let's see here. The world is a bad place.
Okay, yeah. The world is a bad, wicked place, so be in the world, but not of the world. If you are a working mother or an unmarried woman, you're probably of the world, you're bad. You must support your husband in his job and callings because they are the most important, but praise him if he helps with the children or housework, which is your job. So starting with the world is a bad place, I remember one time my son coming home from church and saying, I don't think this is right that, they're teaching me that the world is such a bad place. I don't agree with that, and I definitely agree. They make it into this us versus them. And so you really don't feel like you're in the world. So when I left this paradigm, it was this weird feeling just to be a part of humanity, and realizing the world isn't such a bad place after all.
For me, like the apocalypse and the latter days fed into a lot of that. Did you have the same experience?
Yeah, I did. I didn't really get into a lot of the end days stuff. I thought that was, we just kind of rolled our eyes at.
It may not be gendered as much.
Yeah.
But in terms of how it sets up this us versus them thinking with the rest of the world, it definitely had its influence on me.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think looking through the lens of, or trying to see things from a woman's perspective in this, it really does feed into this notion that as a woman in the church, abiding by the guidance of the priesthood, you may look out at women who have careers or who wear halter tops or all these other things and fuel the us versus them judgmental attitude on it.
Yeah, and I some of these things I was pulling from, actual experiences. And a friend of mine had this happen. She was, found the CES letter and was starting to question, and she wanted to leave the church. And then someone else told her, it's probably because she has a job that's why she's, having trouble with the church. So it's definitely, and it was another woman who said that to her. So it's definitely in there somewhere, that if you have a job and you're a woman, that that might not be the best thing, or, might be too much of the world.
I mean, just the fact that there's this notion of being worldly, like even that word in and of itself sets up that paradigm where the world is bad. And it feeds our ego because we feel like we're better for being outside of the world. And that just sets up that paradigm for judgment. All right, let's see here. You must never think women are not equal.
You must never think that women are not equal in the church. They can be primary president, but if you're primary president, it's actually the bishop that calls your teachers, but you may make suggestions. And if you pray and feel that Sally should be in this calling, the bishop's opinion on the matter always trumps yours, and everything you do must be approved by the bishop. And if you ask that the activity day girls meet more than once a month, because Boy Scouts meet every week, because the activity days advisor is having a baby and will not be able to meet with them the next month, and your bishop says, no, that's not in the handbook, you must never question his authority, and do not question the handbook that is secret and only given to the male leaders. So this is based on something that actually happened. And
I was about to say, this is oddly specific.
Yeah. Yes. That was one of those, just one of the many things that pointed to the inequality And just, gosh, they learn from a young age that I know it's, just barely changed, but throughout my whole life, it was the activity days, the girls met twice a month, and the scouts could meet every week in every ward. It was every week that the scouts met, and they had more advisors. They had a much bigger budget. They had many more activities and camps and all this stuff. And so seeing that in the primary presidencies, especially when my girls started to get into that age and wondering why aren't I doing the things I see my older brothers doing? Why aren't we doing this? And why can't I pass the sacrament? It started to get more, and I talk about that in the last, I think it's the last paragraph, where when I'm looking into my own daughter's eyes and have to teach her, it's one thing for me to be, I don't know if the word is repressed, but things are unequal. And then I have to teach her to live with that. And that's okay. That it's just a new level of, this is not okay. And I don't want this for my daughters. Yeah. And especially when she says, well, why can't I pass the sacrament? And I'm like, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah, I think looking back on my own life, one of my biggest regrets was that I spent so much time as a scout leader and a youth leader of the young men, where I have mostly daughters. I have like one son and the rest are daughters. And they were at an age where they wanted to be involved in doing the things that I was doing with the scouts, and that by all rights they should have been able to do. And I didn't feel empowered enough to just include them against church policy. Mm-hmm. And now they're at an age where they don't want to do any of that crap. And I missed out on, because I see the things that are positive from a lot of the activities that the young men get involved in, where they develop a resilience that is particular to the activities that they do in scouts and stuff. And now I look back on it like, why were my daughters not capable of learning the lessons? Why were they not empowered to learn those lessons in the same way? And my own complicity in that restriction of that aspect of their growth is a source of shame for me, but it's just the paradigm that I was under at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as far as, like I say, if you're the primary president, you don't actually call the teachers or the people. And that was definitely my experience. It may be the leadership roulette type thing. I don't know, but I was definitely, we pray, we, really try and feel this spirit to pick this person. Then we felt like, God was telling us this person. And then the bishop's like, no, it's going to be this person, and it's like, I've had other women say, I really felt that this person should be in. But then the bishop said, no, he felt like this person should be in. But how do I reconcile the two? Because if God is talking to both of us, shouldn't it be the same? So there was definitely a lot of that with the women and the leadership realizing there's something a little off here.
But as the bishop, he probably has access to their secret repentance records and knows that they are not personally worthy.
Or a feminist, they can't be in that calling.
Yeah. We don't want to convey those dangerous feminist ideas to the primary. Let's see. It brings to mind again that meeting recently with the leadership of all the women organizations in the church, where they just said, if you have difficulties with the leader, step back and ask, is it I? Because women's voices can be so shrill, and sometimes we're just so demanding. And what a way to enable further abuse is to model that type of perspective on how you deal with authority.
Yeah, definitely. Unhealthy.
Yeah. All right. So you're questioning gender inequality.
If you ever question the gender inequality, other women will tell you all the things that Mormon women get. And why are you complaining when you've been given so much? And they will ask, why would you want to be burdened with the office of bishop? It's a burden that males bear. And thank goodness we as women don't have to bear that burden. So be grateful. If you question or are not grateful, you are prideful and Satan is getting a hold on your heart. Other women will not trust you and know that Satan is getting to you. The bishop may not give you a calling where you'll be a bad influence. So near the end of me still being an active member of the church, I was noticing more and more and wanted to push the boundaries more. And I wanted to wear pants to church. And I felt like, I know, it was, oh my gosh, I almost had a panic attack the first time. It's just this weirdest thing. You can't explain it to somebody not in the church, that it's a huge thing to wear pants to church, which is just the weirdest thing. So anyway, I felt that I got these side eyes, and mostly from the women, that, and some kind of pity things, or maybe she just doesn't have a strong enough testimony, just this, me, I'm a bad influence.
I always described it as the frown smile. You get the frown smile from, the other women.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Not all women. I mean, I definitely don't want to portray, paint everybody with this wide brush. There was another woman who in my ward wore pants, and that's what gave me the courage to, especially in this ward. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I really loved the strong women in my ward. There were a lot of them, and that really gave me courage. And so not everybody's like this, but I just felt like it was so weird, because these were the things that I was told, if I dare put something on Facebook, about, when Kate Kelly was, kind of in the news and stuff. And if I shared that on Facebook, it was the women who were responding like, why do you want to be bishop? Like, we don't have to deal with these things. Why aren't you grateful? And, there's so many talks about what Mormon women get, it's like, why can't we focus on this thing,
It's interesting to me that you bring up what do Mormon women get, when that is one of the most frequently shared talks by Sherry Dew. And you spoke of a little bit ago how much you respected and valued Sherry Dew's contribution to General Conference. Like, did your perspective on Sherry Dew change? How did you deal with that?
Well, that is an interesting question, because I did really respect her, and I did listen to a lot of her talks, and that in particular. And I think that it did help me focus on the positive, which was a good thing, but it does keep you from seeing the negative, which is also a bad thing. So I think it's good in the church, and this is what I would love to see in the church, is to keep the good, but then also be able to see the bad, so we can change it into a healthier organization, because there is a lot of good in the church. And if we could just change some of these things, it would be really helpful.
Right. Let's see here.
And speaking of callings, you must never say no. If you're overwhelmed, that means you're doing it right. God will never give you more than you can handle. And smile and clean the church building. And you're special, but you're never enough. This one is definitely, it's more like all of that is going through your head all at once. And that's why you're always never feeling like enough. You're always having anxiety, or I am. This is how I experience things. Just you can't say no. There's even a quote I just barely saw. I think it was Eyring who said, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're doing it right. There's this, and like I said before, these women who are overburdened and still enduring to the end and enduring it well, they're the heroes. They're the stories that you hear at church. So, definitely.
Yeah. And the God will never give you more than you can handle. That theme being found in the Book of Mormon, where Nephi is like, I'll go and do the things the Lord command, because he'll never do, command anything, save that he'll say, prepare a way for it. Like that, just the fact that's out there pushes you to just do more and more and more beyond, boundaries that you would otherwise normally set for yourself, and allows the church to occupy so much more in your life and in your mind and your emotional bandwidth.
Yeah, I definitely, like you said, boundaries. I think that's one of the first things I had to learn after I left, was how to set boundaries, how to say no. And I think this is one of the things that gives the men more power, for bishops to call people into positions where they're overwhelmed, because they can say, God will never give you more than I can handle. And I'm speaking for God. And so, you can be the relief society president when you're going through chemotherapy or, whatever. And, if I am asking you to do this, then you're going to be able to do it. And if you say no, you're saying no to God and you don't have enough faith. And it's just this mentality that you can't say no or you're not good enough. You don't have enough faith. And
particularly when you've, sworn an oath of obedience in the temple.
Yeah.
How can you obey and say no? Those are contradictory terms.
So you're not saying no to the bishop, it's saying no to God. They equate these leaders to God in the church. And, everybody will say, oh, the people in the church are imperfect. But in practice, that's not really the case all the time. What the prophet says, what your leaders say, that's what goes because that's what God says.
I think my bishop had the idea that he needed to reinforce the importance of the last calling I received, which was like the facilities guy who makes sure that people show up to clean the toilets. And so there was like this dramatic pause. I need you to know that God told me that you were the person for this calling.
And did you say yes or no?
I said yes. I was a good Mormon. But I didn't do the calling good, if that's... I just posted a sign-up sheet, and I was like, if you want to clean the church, there's the sign-up sheet. I'm not making calls. All right, so...
That's got to be the worst calling in the church, to bug people to tell them to come clean the church toilets.
Yeah, and the worst part is that you have the guys that give so much to that calling that if no one shows up, they'll show up with their family and do it all themselves. Yes. I was not that guy. All right.
Okay, we get into my favorite part.
Yes.
God is loving and he loves his daughters, but he wants them to suffer in polygamy. He asks women to share a husband or to be a handmaiden. Women will wonder why God does not love his daughters as much as his sons, but we don't know all the mysteries of God. When your daughters ask you why God asked Lucy Walker to marry her foster father, Joseph Smith, at age 16 or 15, right? Is it about that age?
It's like 16.
Right after her mother died and her father was sent away, and you read of her agony in her journal, you tell them God loves his daughters, but he asked them to suffer. And Joseph Smith was suffering too. He didn't want to marry all those women and lie to his wife. Lot there.
Yeah. How do you process all that? I mean, that is the one thing that once my eyes were open, I'm just like, how in the world can any woman stay in the church after reading D&C 132 and learning about Joseph Smith's conduct of polygamy?
Yeah. That is the thing that, when I was contemplating, I know the church isn't true, but maybe I could be a non-believer and still go, or, the corruption, the foundation of the church of Joseph Smith, if he can do something that's evil, I don't want anything to do with this, because I just feel so bad for those women, especially like at age 16. This is something I can't be a part of at all. I think this is something that's, I really was upset when I did hear about this, and the other women would say, well, he's not perfect. Men are imperfect. And I hated that response, even though I wanted to stay in the church. I wanted to still believe, but I could not accept that this came of God, that he wanted this for these women, or that it was just a little imperfection, like if I say a swear word, he just kind of accidentally,
is that really
slept
an
with all these
excuse
women.
that is that really an excuse that you'll hear faithful women offer? Was that maybe he made a mistake in polygamy, or is it only some of the polygamy?
No, it's definitely, I think almost every woman I talked to about this, because I talked about it a lot, because this is the, as soon as I heard about Fanny Alger's, like, I'm struggling to hold on for the rest of the time, So I talked to people like, how do you make this work? And almost every woman would say, the leaders are imperfect. Joseph Smith was not a perfect person, and that just never sat right with me, because being perfect and being a sexual predator are two ends of the spectrum.
Yes, it's not one bump from one to the other.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you tell me that that was the overwhelming majority of rationales you received from women, was that those were mistakes, because the overwhelming majority of rationales I've heard from men is that, it was a divinely commanded practice. Joseph Smith was doing what he was supposed to be doing in the restoration at the time, and there's nothing wrong or iniquitous or sinful in what he did. And if I thought there was, then that was me being judgmental and being prideful and claiming that I knew more than the prophet.
Yeah,
And so
someone
there's
in
a very
my
different response.
Oh yeah. I mean, and my family, thought the same thing. And I think, I don't know if it's maybe me personally. I don't know if you've seen the Handmaid's Tale
Not yet,
series,
it's on my
but
list.
I saw the first one. I couldn't watch it after that. But maybe as a woman, you think of the details more and can put yourself in, Lucy Walker's place. And
Mm-hmm.
16 and your mother just died. There's no way God would command this, in my mind at least. When you think of the details and the emotions and on the contrast, God is loving, I can't excuse me, I can't reconcile the two of those. So
The thing
yeah.
that I think it's tempting for some people to say, well, that's far removed. That's in like the 1800s. It's very different from what's happening now. And for me, like when you read Lucy Walker's account, one of the things that she says that Joseph told her was, you believe I'm the prophet, right? In his proposition. And so the thing that to me was the most egregious is that the same priesthood authority, the same lineage, that we have sitting in Salt Lake City right now, that same priesthood authority was used in the conduct of these plural marriage arrangements that I see as abusive and manipulative. And if that priesthood authority was used to those ends, then it has no legitimacy.
I
And it was
definitely
just, go
sorry,
ahead.
there's a lag and I don't want to talk over you. I'm sorry, but
That's all right.
no, I definitely think this is something applicable right now, like with the Me Too movement, that, if it's in the 1800s or if it's now, does that matter? What is sexual assault and what right do women have over their own bodies and their own sexuality? And I don't think, I was very adamant that my daughters never be taught that this was something from God and that they never have control over their own body and their own sexuality, to say, no, I don't want this. And I think it's really important to teach all girls and women that they do have a say over their own body and their own sexuality, and that this wasn't right, that there are certain standards of consent, and this didn't meet those standards of consent. Just to respect a woman in any age and time, as a human and as a person and as a, giving her any sort of dignity.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you hear defenders of Joseph, who are usually men, say, oh, well, you're just engaging in presentism, of condemning Joseph for marrying his 16-year-old foster daughter. That's not out of the norm for the time. And it just doesn't hold any water when you look at how he injected his priesthood authority into those proposals. And so the women, if they were respected in their autonomy, should have been free to say no, even if you allow that he as a foster parent could propose to them. But then when he injects this, I'm the prophet, and the gate to God's favor is going to be closed to you if you say no, and then you just hear the heartbreak in Lucy Walker's, statement that she felt like she offered herself as a human sacrifice to further the purposes of God. You cannot accept that as a divine proposal.
Yeah, definitely not. Like you said, when you read her journals and read, okay, it may be the 1800s, but she was suffering, there was some agony there, and that's legitimate, whether it's, 1800s or now. That's definitely something that should be considered. Yeah.
So, treating or educating women culturally that they should be expected to suffer so that when that suffering, when they're proposed with something like that, that suffering is somehow considered an offering to God rather than
Mhm.
a big red flag. That further enables these types of abuses of power and authority in the modern day.
Oh yeah, definitely. I heard something, with Elizabeth Smart, that's something how her perpetrator used something to that extent as well. And I've heard of other stories where maybe bishops or people in authority kind of use that same thing to, their own purposes or whatever. So yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely something that, and for people who say, well, they could say no, some women did say no to Joseph Smith, but when you talk about what is consent, and like you said, for him to inject, well, do you believe me as prophet? And, her mother just died and she was separated from her family and all this other stuff, then no, that wasn't consent. So I definitely think that's something important to teach the kids, and for women to not today say that that was okay or that came from a loving God.
Yeah. And it's funny that in the moral education that the church provides, they have to specifically carve out an exclusion which would allow this type of abuse of power in order for them to teach morality. And so they
Mm-hmm.
can't do it because it's inherently immoral. We wouldn't excuse it in any other religious leader from any other paradigm. And so it prevents the church from actually having a fully developed moral framework that they can teach someone. All they can ever teach is a moral framework that is poisoned by the idea that if a man claiming God said something should happen, then no matter what it is, you have to excuse it. And
Yeah,
that's
that's such
inherently
a good
immoral.
point. Yeah, very good point.
All right, we're getting closer to your conclusion here.
All right. But God loves his daughters, even if it seems pretty clear that it's not as much as his sons. God's plan is better than yours. You read in the scriptures about men and what they do, and you tell your daughters that God still loves his daughters just as much as his sons, but they see it in your eyes. They learn to hide the pain behind the smile, and that even though it seems unfair, do not trust your own thinking. The men speak for God, and they say that God loves everyone. So your confusion must be from the devil. Your fate in the heavens is to be a polygamous wife, but you'll feel differently in heaven. So yeah, this was definitely the cognitive dissonance I was dealing with. That, this isn't unfair, or this isn't fair, but God is loving. How can the two be together? So, and that sexism is good and it's loving and from a loving God, a lot of dissonance in those two teachings there.
Yeah, I feel like for me, this was the paragraph that really hit me the most powerful when I reflect on the decision we had to make at a time where we were going through the church isn't true. Maybe Joseph was a fallen prophet. Okay, well, Joseph was not, he was just a con man through and through, but the church has evolved into a good organization and it's a great place to raise a family. And then when my daughters started going to young women's and getting those lessons that put them in the box that you're describing, where some of their authentic feelings and indignation and crying out against these inherent inequalities was being stifled and turned back against them to give them the sense that they were wrong for feeling that way. We had to come to the decision that it was not a healthy place to raise a family, particularly if it was a family of girls. But even if we had, more than just our one son, then we were going to raise them with this paradigm about what they were to expect of women and demand of women. And we couldn't reconcile it.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately, what led me as well. And I talk about, you look your daughters in the eyes and they see and they learn from you. And I just couldn't teach this to my daughters. And it's funny because, if you leave the church, then a lot of people will say, well, what about your kids? For us, a lot of my family members worry about my children. And I'm like, I did this for my children. It hurts. My husband went through this grieving process because, this was our whole life for 40 years. and it was a hard thing, but now we're happier. But I did that. I feel like I absorbed that pain and went through that pain for my kids so that they never had to deal with this, and they never had to deal with the inequality and the cognitive dissonance, which led to a lot of the depression, all of this, cognitive dissonance. And I just have to have more faith. So it must be me. There's something wrong with me, that I don't have enough faith that I can believe that Joseph Smith, really was acting in God's will, and that God is a loving God, and that in heaven I will be a polygamist wife, and that's supposed to make me happy somehow,
Yeah. I mean, those are realities that probably exist in your mind. I never even thought about the fear that a woman must have that her spouse is going to marry other women if she died first or something. I think my first exposure to some of those ideas was in Carolyn Pearson's book about the ghosts of eternal polygamy, where she, put some surveys out on the internet and asked women in the church and outside of the church to really express some of those honest fears and feelings that they have. And it just totally blows your perspective away to see how women have been affected by just the presence of that doctrine in the eternities, regardless of whether or not it's practiced now. Is that something
definitely.
you felt?
Oh, intensely, actually. When I married my husband, and the thought of, if I could die at any second, which in his patriarchal blessing, it says something about, I took to mean that I was going to die early, and thinking this man that I really love, I could now be sharing with somebody else, if I did die. I had a lot of intense anxiety to where I couldn't sleep. I was having nightmares. I was talking about it with other people. And now I look back and I feel sorry for myself that I had to go through that, because for me, it was intensely painful. And I definitely felt that. And so when Dallin H. Oaks at the conference talk, when he kind of was snickering at the woman and the woman's story who also had these fears, and he just kind of blew it off as something funny. I was definitely offended by that. And it's something where, if these people are called of God, they need to be sympathetic and empathetic to these women, but instead they're laughing at them. It doesn't make sense.
I felt like he was so tone deaf in that talk as well. And that's just me as an evil apostate feeling that way.
Yeah.
This idea that confusion is from the devil, and so the feelings of confusion that you have as a woman trying to make sense of this doctrine and how it works in the eternities, it's not just like your honest mind dealing with it, it's the influence of Satan. That has got to be just a really difficult thing to wrestle with, when I think as any outsider looking at any group dealing with polygamy and the inherent imbalance and exploitation that goes along with that would say, of course, people are going to have questions about that. But then to have that labeled as Satan, did you
causes depression and anxiety? And
okay, so all that was fed into that.
Oh, definitely. I think now that I'm out of it, I definitely think my depression and anxiety was a lot from this confusion that's labeled as, from the devil, because, if you have doubts, you're supposed to doubt your doubts. And if you just don't have enough faith, because I'm like, I don't know if I can believe this stuff anymore. And so I just don't have enough faith. And then if you're still in the church and you're having doubts, you're just not, you're not good enough. You're the one that everybody needs to help, get their testimony stronger. And so it's just not a good cycle. It's not a good environment. You think something's wrong with you if you have questions or any kind of confusion or this cognitive dissonance. Something's wrong with you. And like I said, I don't know if other people feel like this, but for me it was, but I can't leave. That was just not an option. It wasn't until I listened to the Young's podcast on Mormon stories that, and they talked about how they left, and I saw that there were still good people, that freed me to say, I can leave. That is an option, and I can be a good person. And so
you're talking about Cody and Leah Bryant
yeah.
Young. I think that was their podcast.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
family that did a series on Mormon stories about their own journey. It's funny, the idea that you'll feel differently in heaven. You just have to endure to the end.
Yeah.
There's another talk where one of the great orators in Mormonism says that he's waiting until he's safely dead, and then he'll have the answers to these things. It just seems like, number one, it's a cop out. It's a way for leaders to avoid having to answer things. But number two, it's effective in having members continue to accept and tolerate things that they would otherwise be empowered to reject just until they die. And then they'll have all the answers. And that is just like
Yeah.
a terribly manipulative way to respond to these things.
Yeah, and I think it really detracts from the joy of life. To my life went from enduring to the end, endure it well, to savor and enjoy and, enjoy every moment. So it's kind of weird because a lot of people think when you leave the church, you're going to be so sad. And I'm actually more happy now because I'm focused in the moment now and not waiting for a future life that's going to be better. It's right now, that I'm trying to enjoy every moment and savor every moment and be happy, and say no to the things that I don't want to do.
Well, that's the other side of it, is you're describing finding the joy. Everybody's life is still going to be filled with trials and with things that are not going well and things that are not good. But now you don't have to tolerate and accept some of those things if you're empowered to voice criticism against them and try to change them without having to break out of some sort of priesthood cage that you've been placed in as a woman.
Yeah, definitely.
And happiness is no longer just out of reach, as it seems like in the last paragraph you talk about.
Well, and I also think this is dangerous because some people might think, well, my life really sucks right now, but if I commit suicide, then I'll be happy and I have all this happiness waiting for me. I think that's a really dangerous thing to teach, that, especially for someone who may be suicidal and think that's a better option.
Yeah, and especially when the notion is out there that, even the celestial kingdom was so glorious that people would be killing themselves just to get there, which is an idea that you hear repeated in
Yeah.
church history. That when you combine that with the distortions of thinking that can happen with someone who's really racked with depression and some of the other inputs that go into a choice for suicide, or somebody who finds themselves presented with that choice and considering it, it's just really dangerous. I agree. So the final paragraph: you will be happy, just not now.
You'll be happy, not now, but in heaven. Endure to the end. Be faithful. Doubt your doubts. Never trust your own thinking. Polygamy isn't unfair. God is loving. He loves his daughters. They are special. They just need to endure the suffering for God, for happiness later. And keep working for perfection and your worth, because God wants you to be worthy of him. Yeah. Again, just all of that kind of coming together, just all of this confusing, there's this, there's that. Don't trust your own thinking was a big one when I was a member. Definitely one of those wonderful things that happened when I left is I can trust myself now. I can trust my own thinking, and I'm definitely learning to do that more, to trust myself. That also goes in with the confidence that I've gained since leaving, to trust your own thinking. And I feel like I was really brave to be able to leave. And so that's another thing that, I'm almost, proud of myself, that I can think for myself and that I can do something brave. And
it's interesting.
Yeah.
I found that it's kind of like a muscle that you can flex and strengthen. This whole trusting yourself and trusting your own thinking. That famous quote, doubt your doubts. If you just translate that to what it actually means, it means doubt yourself. Because your doubts are things coming from your own logical, rational, compassionate mind. And so for the church to use that as a theme in staying within their little prison of belief once you break free from that, then it's a bold statement of starting to trust yourself. But it doesn't end there. It's one of those things that you start to build on and on as you start to wrestle with all the different questions that you now have uncertainty about because you've let go of the comforting certainty that the church handed you on false terms.
And
How
it
was that
helps, like,
journey?
well, I was going to say it also helps with being an even more moral person, because like you said, they can justify any immoral act, even the polygamy of Joseph Smith. Now if I trust myself, I can say, no, I don't agree with that, or if I see something else, then I can trust myself to say, no, I don't agree with that either. And I think I've become an even more moral person because I can't justify some things that I see that other people say were okay, and I know they're not okay. So not even in the church, but in other places, translated to other places.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the abuses, a lot of inequalities, a lot of these things that exist in the church exist in other parts of our life as well. And I agree with you. Going through the experience of leaving the church, starting to develop that framework empowers you to see and draw those boundaries in many parts of your life as well. And so I'm glad to hear that that's been part of your journey. This whole notion that you have to endure suffering for God and enduring suffering for happiness, like, how does that make sense?
It doesn't. And that's why it's good to leave, because you don't have to endure, you can enjoy. And like you said, before, it's, endure till the end. And maybe, that's what Joseph Smith used, for the women, like, yeah, you're in agony now, but, you're going to get so many blessings in heaven. You're going to get blessings. And, you may be overwhelmed right now and you have to clean the church building and you have to do this, but in heaven, you're going to have so many more blessings. So you do just endure all this suffering, and you think that, oh, the more that I suffer, the more blessings that I'm going to get, and the more proud that Heavenly Father is of me because I'm doing these things. And, there's even Job in the Bible who endured all this suffering, and he's the hero, and he, won favor of God because he was able to endure the suffering.
It's interesting to me how this is a reflection of a subversion of good ideas, in that, if somebody does want to pursue a master's degree as you did, or some other, object of their personal priorities, in many cases, it does take a form of delayed gratification. You do have to sacrifice in terms of the effort that you put in to earn those things or to achieve those things, but you're doing it based on priorities that you've set for yourself that are based in your own individual value system. They're not based on an external expectation from an illegitimate authority. But by, adding God into the mix, then they can capitalize on people who do have a reverence for God and place that as a high value. It's just there's this, misappropriation of God for the men at the top of whatever organization it is.
Yeah, manipulation. Yeah, of this. Yeah, of something that's natural and good, and a manipulation for power and control. And yeah, definitely.
And the very last sentence about God wanting you to be worthy of him. It seems like, since we've investigated so many of these paradigms of religion that have men placing themselves in between the relationship between an individual and God, that you need to start making sure that the God that you're pursuing is worthy of you.
Yeah.
Rather than the other way around, because men seem to insert themselves into that relationship so frequently.
Yeah, and that's definitely something I didn't see while I was in the church. You put this blind faith and trust into, especially, the prophet and the leaders at the top. And now I can see how dangerous that was, for me to just, I didn't think it was blind trust and faith, but that's definitely what it was. And now how easily you can be manipulated. And, when I was younger and the Proposition 8 was coming out and everything, and the leaders said, we don't support gay marriage. And I was like, well, I don't understand, but they must know something that I don't know. And now, kind of goes back to I can do my own thinking, and just how easily it was for me to kind of be taken over, my own thinking, and my own moral compass, even, by these men who claim they have authority.
Well, you put this Facebook post out there. I think, as we've learned in this discussion, there's a whole lot of personal experience and perhaps a sense of your identity that has been strengthened and developed even since your journey outside of the church, injected into what you've written here. But
Mhm.
you still exist in a network of other friends and social contacts who are very much in the church.
Mhm.
If you're anything like me, many of them probably have put you on mute so they don't have to deal with you. I know in my case, my rantings, but how has it been received so far in the world of social media? What sort of responses have you had?
Actually, overwhelmingly positive. I am actually kind of blown away by the positive responses that I've gotten. There are so many people who said, "Yeah, this is my experience too," and feel validated. And that's why I wanted to write it, because I wanted to feel validated, and I never did. So something's wrong with me. So if I put that out there, then all these women are like, "Oh, that." Or even couldn't put a finger on it like I before, and now I'm like, okay, that's why I was depressed and anxious, but I couldn't put a finger on it before.
Mhm.
And some people were even like, on Reddit, there was a comment that said, I tried to commit suicide when I was a young mother, and this is exactly why. So I definitely feel like, although this isn't everybody's experience, this is definitely touching on a nerve of, this theme of women in Mormonism that may not be explicitly written in the doctrine, but this is how the women are experiencing the teachings of Mormonism and the culture. And I do have some family members who aren't happy with the post. I'm not going to, tell their story, but I can see where they're coming from. I don't want to, just a second. I don't want to tell their story for them. And I can see where they're coming from if that's not their experience. And before I left, maybe I would have said this is not my experience either. But now that I'm out and I can see more objectively, and have a little more insight now that I'm removed from the situation. And because, all of a sudden my confidence is, gained a ton, and my depression and anxiety are instantly gone overnight. It was amazing. It's just, this was real. And I think there is a case for looking at the harmful teachings that are given to women in the church.
And their contribution to the mental health issues that they have. And that's not to say that every woman who separates themselves from the church, or every man who separates himself from the church, will see an instant relief of some of the mental health issues that they have. I mean, there's a lot of different inputs to anxiety and depression. And so I think the recommendation that you'll hear a lot when you go through the transition of leaving something like your faith paradigm, getting the help of a mental health professional who's trained in some evidence-based ways to cope with the stresses of that and to heal and to progress, is good advice no matter who you are. So I'm very glad to hear that you've had that degree of relief from it.
Yeah, thank you.
What is next from you? Because I'm warning you that just in hearing your story and seeing how well you're able to convey your experience, you have a really powerful voice for these things. And
Thank you.
And so I'd love to hear more and to see more from you. And everybody's on Zoom these days, so
well, thank
I
you.
know encouraging people to share their perspective. I think for me, it was maybe a little bit similar. I had like one article I wrote that was just my feelings at the time, and I forwarded it to like Mormon Think. And I think this was when Grant Palmer was still the editor of that. And he just sent me back a encouraging post. I like what you've written here. Keep it up. And that was just kind of like all I needed to continue to write and talk more. And it's more about trusting your own inner voice. And so I'd love to hear more of what you have to say, and would definitely encourage you to find
Thank you very much.
an outlet for that.
Yeah, I just would quickly say that I think it is important for us to share our stories, to know that we're not alone, because in the church I felt alone in my, thinking and suffering. I definitely think it's important for us to share our stories. So yeah, I appreciate that.
All right. Anything else that you want to share about your experience in the aftermath of all of this? We're just after 2 hours, so I think that when we broadcast this later, this will be a good starting point to invite some other callers to share their own experience. Anything you want to add?
Just that everybody's experience is valid. Some people told me when they first saw this post, this isn't true. This isn't right. This isn't what is taught. But, like I said in the very beginning, this is my experience, and to not invalidate someone's experience, even if it's not your own experience. So I kept the post up there, even though I was told this isn't right, and, 250 comments later,
Yeah.
I realized
everybody else is saying this is exactly how I felt.
yeah, that maybe it's not so off after all.
It's funny, when I started reading it, it was immediately reminded me of a very popular post that's going on right now about COVID-19. And there's both a text and then there's a picture of a woman holding a fake news conference where she's talking about these contradictory, seemingly mutually incompatible messages that we've all been given about the coronavirus and what we should do, and how it just points out some of the ridiculousness of what's going on. And we're all stuck in the middle of it. And I feel like what you've conveyed is what women are stuck in the middle of, is these contradicting messages, and how do you make sense of it? And it almost seems impossible, and all you can do is just escape it.
Yes. It's better on the other side.
Christy Carlson, thank you so much for taking the time to share a little bit more of your insight with us, and we'll definitely
thank you for having me
for more.
I'm honored.
All right,
take
care.
You too. Thanks.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. We're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines. If you want to share some of your impressions of what Kristie had to share with us, maybe you've had some of your own experiences and can really relate or feel validated by what she talked about, we would love to hear from you. I think I have the phone set up. If you want to call 210-422-2222, then that's area code 210-422-2222. Then you can give us a ring and share some of your ideas. We've had a lot of good feedback on the comment stream from both Facebook and YouTube. I think the common thread is that a lot of people felt like Kristie was sharing their story. Even though you may be a woman growing up in the church in a completely different part of the world, a lot of these same themes and threads will probably have found place in your own life, because a lot of these experiences she's talking about are the natural outcomes of certain types of doctrine, certain structures of authority, and certain moral frameworks seen through the lens of gender disparity that are a reality for Mormonism no matter where you are. So it's really important to be able to identify those things and to feel empowered to call them what they are. And I think that's been a big part of her story as she related it over the past couple of hours. So again, the phone number is 210-422-2222. One of the remarkable things about the story that she shared is that she acknowledged that she wrestled with anxiety and depression, and felt like as soon as she flipped that switch, as soon as she entertained the possibility and accepted the reality that the church itself, its foundational claims, its authority claims are all false, then it completely changed how she thought about things. All right, and her experience. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff. I think I might be having an audio issue, so give me just a second. Can you hear me? Okay, let me just hit a reset on my audio engine, and I think we'll connect things up. Hold on. Okay, say something. Okay. I can hear you, but I'm afraid the audience may not be able to because I have a monitor here and it's not showing you. Let me just hit the speakers and you're going from that. And what I will do is add one more input device to where I'm going here. And I'll make this HyperX Quadcast, not there. Okay. I'm sorry for the delay on this. Let me delete that block and select Application Chrome. Okay. Try saying something now. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, well, if anyone in the audience can post that you can hear the caller, say something, caller, if you want to go ahead and just pose your question. I'll repeat it if no one can hear you.
Like the depression that happens when you're worried about what if your kids leave the church and that makes me a bad mom. That stuff, my mom struggles with that so much. And
I'm going to pause you right
hard.
there because I just fixed the audio so people didn't hear the first part of your comment, which was that you related to a lot of what she said, particularly around some of the experiences in the temple. And if you can kind of just start from there, then people can hear you now.
Yeah, well, I haven't been to the temple, but all of my sisters, except for one, have been.
Okay.
And so that stuff doesn't specifically apply to me, but a lot of it I can see in my mom and my sisters. And like all throughout my life, I remember my mom being very depressed and just having so much weight on her. And seeing that now and understanding it and seeing that it's all caused by the church and the expectations that she was given. And my mom is an amazing person and an amazing parent, and but she feels like a failure because 3 of her kids, she has 12 kids, 3 of her kids have left the church, and she feels like an absolute failure. Even though we're all successful people, even, those of us who are in and out of the church, like we're all good people, successful people, and we're genuinely good people, like genuinely kind people, and trying to do our best to be the best people we can. And it's so sad that that's something that she feels like she's failed on.
Yeah, it's like outside of any other paradigm, she should, by all rights, feel very proud of, her being as a mother and the status and achievements of her children. And it's only because you've got this overlay on her worldview, which places a value judgment on her worth as a mother that is dependent on whether or not her children adhere to the church and stay within the parameters of the church. It's just another one of, the weights on the back of any woman who's gotten to that age who now has to deal with that.
Yeah. And one of the things that she said early on was about and throughout actually, about not being allowed to have negative emotions.
Yeah.
And that specifically for me really resonated. I can portray sad emotions, but I have a block to any other negative emotions like anger. I don't know how to express it, and I think that's something similar is true for a lot of people, especially women that have come out of the church. And it's bizarre being around people who have never been in the church, and they just don't understand why you're still smiling and talking super happy, even though what you're saying is so angry. It just doesn't equate. And I have to be like, well, sorry, I was raised in a cult, so I can't be angry.
I totally hear you, and that a lot of those things linger with you. And it strikes me as you're talking about this, that one of the things not being able to express that full range of even the negative emotions is that there are healthy aspects of expressing negative emotion in that they call attention to issues that do need to be addressed. And in some cases, they give messages about the severity of those issues and the seriousness of them. But by silencing that entire avenue of expression, you don't get the benefit of those signals of problems that really do need to be addressed. You'll see the phrase "fuck that shit" a lot in the comments here, and for me personally, like, I can totally relate to what you're talking about. Even when you leave the church, you hold on to some of the chains that kept you emotionally captive and that kept your expressions within the parameters acceptable to the church. Even after leaving the church, it took me a long time to even be able to say those words, because when I grew up, fart was a bad word. Like, I had to force my mouth to say the word fart because that was a bad word. And there's just all this control on the language, and that's just, even me as a man, and it's much more so when you have all of the sexist themes layered on top of that. How are you going to, or I guess, how do you and the other siblings who have left the church, when you see the negative effect it's having on your mom, how do you deal with that? How do you try to reinforce her worth and value as a mother? Is there anything you can do?
I personally don't have a very good relationship with my mom. I think that's mostly on my end. I'm not even sure if she understands that I don't have as positive of a relationship with her as I would like to. I do love my mom though, and I want her to know that anyway, even though my feelings with her are not all positive. I want her to know that in general, I still think of her positively, and I still think that she's a wonderful person and a wonderful mother. So I try to, whenever she does talk to me, I try to be as positive about her and who she is as a person, and just reinforce that, hey, even though we don't agree on a lot of things, I still see you in an extremely positive light. I still see you as, a person that has done so many great things for me and for other people.
It's a difficult thing when you escape the type of indoctrination and manipulation that are inherent to this type of controlling group. And then you deal still with loved ones who are under that spell, and you can see how it affects their view of themselves, their view of the world, and the choices that they make. And for me, even when you reflect on your own life and you see things that they did perhaps or subjected to you to as a child that you may see as abusive now, and trying to reconcile that with the understanding that you have of that the indoctrination colors the choices and the values that people have. And so dealing with people who are still in that space, even though you have an understanding of it, and wanting to still have connection and love with them, can be just really challenging to do. So I can feel you there. Anything else
no, I think that's all that I really had to say.
Well, thank you so much for your call, and keep listening. We'll see if we hear any messages from anyone else who had similar experiences.
Okay, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Okay. You too. All right, so if you'd like to share your perspective, you can call 210-422-2222. Want to see if you found anything that resonated with our our discussion today with a prior caller. I think the way that the church and its indoctrination inserts itself into the relationships and the lives of its members, even intergenerationally, particularly when some people's children choose to leave the church, it just creates conflict that doesn't really have to be there. And it doesn't even have to be children that leave the church. I've talked to people who in their retirement discovered the real history of the church and realized that a great deal of their lives were devoted to supporting an organization that had no legitimate foundation and separated from the church, and now they themselves are shunned by their faithful children who see them as a negative influence on the grandchildren. And that type of dynamic, I think, is particularly lamentable. We see it in the Jehovah's Witnesses to a really powerful degree, but it exists even in Mormonism. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can.
So I made a few notes while she was talking, and I even thought this before she said it, about being at home with the kids. I would get upset with my husband if he didn't fulfill his calling. He may come home from work and I may be completely frazzled, dishes everywhere, trash all this stuff that needs to be done, but I didn't care about that. That was my responsibility, and I would get upset if he wasn't doing what I thought that he needed to be doing for his calling. So that's just something that I was thinking while she was talking. Also, something I noticed is during fast and testimony meetings, I don't think I've ever been to one where somebody didn't get up and say how inspired the bishop is and how he's a man of God and all these things. But very rarely did I ever hear someone get up and say how inspired the Relief Society president is, or any woman in general. So there was that.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
There was just this one time where I guess you can call it a yellow flag. It wasn't really a red flag, but it was just a moment where we can call it a moment of clarity, where I was like, okay, something's not right here. I had been asked to do, we just had our first baby, and I had been asked to do something for the stake, and it was something that was huge. It was going to take up a lot of my time, and I was a brand new mom, and it had to do with the profession that I used to do. And so I agreed to do it, and we went to the stake center to practice, and I was sweating. I was, it was a big thing. And so when we got done, I had the borrowed keys to get in the stake center, and when we got done, I stepped out into the foyer to ask if we needed to close all the gym doors, because there was a lot, and because I was told I need to lock up, after we leave or whatever, with the main doors. But I didn't know this, but were having a bishop's meeting with the stake, and evidently they hadn't all been called back yet. And there was a lot of bishops sitting in the foyer. And I opened the door, out of breath, and I said, do we have to close the gym doors? And evidently they were having a very intense conversation, because they all stopped talking, then looked at me, and then looked down. And nobody answered me. And it was just one of those moments where, I'll call it a yellow flag, where I was like, okay, this is weird. Like, am I in the Twilight Zone? Because if I was anywhere else and I asked somebody a question, they would probably answer me. Like, okay, what's going on here? Let me see what else. Oh, and the Handmaid's Tale. So I watched that in spite of my better judgment because of the rating. but I had kind of already had one foot out the door, and I was becoming inactive. And the episode where the men are in the car, and they talk about how they're going to get the women on board with having handmaidens and reproducing. And I don't know which character commented, but they said something like, I will just make it a ritual. You know, they eat that shit up. I literally sat straight up in bed. I was like, oh my God. So that was a moment.
I haven't seen that series yet, but I could imagine if that was a scene there that it would immediately bring to mind like Nauvoo and Joseph Smith's actions, and how, you know, somehow the things that he was doing, which would be considered adultery in any other context, if you add a religious ceremony and a theological framework to it and make it a ritual, then suddenly it's, you know, it's divine and it's acceptable.
Yes. Well, as a woman, you know, I've been told that, or I've heard men say that, and specifically stake president and bishops say that women are more holy than men, and that women are more important and special to Heavenly Father. But as a woman, what triggered me and what resonated with me in watching The Wives' Tale is, we're so important, let's keep them busy doing this.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give them these things to keep them busy with, because they love that, right? Because we think we're doing something holy and for the Lord.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's kind of like a way to paternalistically shut you up.
Yeah. I mean, even with going to the temple, I remember going and just sitting there and thinking, you know, to quote Lindsay, I can't think of her last name, but the world around us is burning. And yet here we sit, I keep watching the same thing over and over again. And, you know, for somebody who's dead, you know, it just is like, wait a minute, what? And that's supposed to be one of the most important things that we do with our time, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, it's just you're so important. We're going to tell you what you can do, but there are limits to that, because, you know, you are a woman and you don't hold the priesthood. And so I don't know. You have to watch The Handmaid's Tale, because I would love to hear what you think about that.
Well, it's definitely on my list. One of the other shows that really kind of brings to mind what you're talking about is the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. And it's the story of this, you know, several women that are kept in an underground bunker. They're told that the world is being destroyed outside by a pastor who keeps them. And one of the things that he has them do is they've got this mystery crank, and they've got to turn the mystery crank. And she says, you know, she keeps herself being able to do it because she can do anything for 10 seconds. And so she does it for 10 seconds, then she does it more. And she's told the whole time that this mystery crank is just so important. They have to keep doing it. And so a lot of their time is, you know, to fill, you know, you got to do this mystery crank. And they only later learned that while they were suffering with deprivation, the mystery crank was a generator that was providing the pastor with all of the electricity and comforts that he wanted. And I just, like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is like temple work and everything, keeping people busy doing something that they don't have a full understanding of, that seems important, but it just keeps them busy and keeps them distracted from the reality of their situation, so they don't realize and wake up to the fact that they're being exploited.
Yeah, I think you may have to throw a little bit of tithing in there too with that. Is that we've got some people that are living in luxury, and we're busting our ass here and doing so much stuff for free, and even if it means our professional job, we offer that because we covenant to do that. But there was one more thing that I wanted to bring up. So I lived among saints who really dabbled in the Lori Daybell stuff, but before.
Oh yeah.
And they were all so excited, and these were the ones that they were the loudest from the podium, for how much they would just boo-hoo over the Savior, and they went to the temple every weekend. Most of them worked there, and they were all so excited about the millennium and doing temple work for 1,000 years. And For the longest time, I would not even let my mind go there to the place of, holy shit, I do not want to do that. I wouldn't even let myself think that. But if you think about it, like, I want to do that for 1,000 years. Like, I just sit and watch the same thing over and over and over again. So, yeah.
I can feel you on that. And for people who aren't familiar with it, there's it's kind of like a faction of Mormonism that are kind of hyper fundamental, that they have gone off on kind of reclaiming some of the early church stuff of personal revelation and really kind of end times theology and everything. And they follow a couple of luminaries that have put themselves out as people who are receiving some of this new inspiration, kind of a prophet or prophetess status. And you'll see them as Chad Daybell and I forget the name of the other one, but there's a particular flavor of Mormonism that would really resonate with that. And so people who are really, really excited about the church and really, heavily invested in end time stuff would really resonate with that.
I couldn't discern between the two for a long time because we had such a where I was going, our ward was predominantly of that
Really?
belief system.
Wow.
Yes, and as a teenager, I became inactive. As a young adult, I was just inactive. I didn't invest. And so when I got, I think I was about 24, I started, wanting to have what my parents always, talked about with googly eyes about the temple and all that kind of stuff. So I went back and I didn't hold anything back. I went in with both feet. And so I felt like I had some catching up to do. And so I did. I mean, I think I went through the quad 4 times in a year. I watched only the BYU channel. And so when I'm active and I'm among these other people that are more of the hyper Mormonism, what they were saying was not untrue to me based on what I had read and studied from past prophets. So I did notice after a while, I thought, I don't hear them talk about this stuff at General Conference anymore. I don't, the whole gathering concept. And I tried to remember, where is the first place I heard it? Well, the first place I heard it was from them. And then I remember my mom teaching me that because she didn't know that it was from the hyper religious sect. So I thought it was part of doctrine. So I started doing some research and found the Avow website, and I paid the $10 to get in, and I was like, holy shit, like this isn't even the LDS faith, like this is an which I was not familiar with. I didn't know that there were different snuffers, and I didn't know any of that. And so that was huge for me. And I don't know, that's another reason that I don't go that, not just as going as a non-believer. I don't want my children walking around that. It's a toxic environment. If there are all these things that they're predicting to come true, what's keeping people here? And what would keep somebody like Lori Vallow from murdering, whoever? If she thinks that the end's right around the corner, she actually believes that. I mean, what would keep people from doing awful things? So it was a toxic environment, and it was hell for me. And I went through about a 2-year breakdown because I fought it so hard about trying to keep believing and keep doing. And then we had a diagnosis of one of our children that just, it done me in. And with the advice from the bishop, it was like I wasn't allowed to feel. I wasn't allowed to grieve that, my son got this diagnosis. I wasn't allowed to be angry about it. He kept reiterating to me how strong my son was in the pre-existence. And, he was one of the whatever. And I just was like, really? Like, I'm just thinking, you don't know that. You don't know that. And I think that's what led me out, because I thought to myself, I thought for myself. I was thinking, you know what? You don't really know that. And I didn't say that out loud, but I thought, if they don't know things like that, what else, do they not know? They just say.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But thank you so much, Jonathan. I cannot even begin to tell you how much you've helped me.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. And I'm so glad to hear your voice and the voice of Kristie and all the other people who are commenting on this just really feel, because I really do believe strongly that sharing these stories so that people realize that some of the feelings that they maybe had that they've buried are not they're not alone. Other people were feeling and thinking these sorts of things, and I can definitely see how these perspectives have inserted themselves into your life. When you were talking about feeling bad about your husband if he's not fulfilling his calling, these systems of belief insert extreme ultimate values into our minds. And so then we start judging everything around us by its adherence to those values. And so when you have this notion that fulfilling your calling is fulfilling God's purposes for his kingdom, well, suddenly that takes a higher priority than anything else that you have. And it inserts yourself into your relationship with your husband. And so, it colors everything.
It does. And it also, it taught me very quickly, and maybe I had already accepted this as part of my life, is that I don't have any boundaries. If the church, needs my husband for 50 hours a week, then okay, whatever. I don't get to really have an opinion about it. And I would try to make myself think, okay, this is good. Like, we're favored of God because he got this really high calling. And, that's insane.
And your willingness to sacrifice and give that up and do it without complaint is a measure of your virtue and worth as a woman.
That's right.
Because if you do complain, then there's something wrong with you, or you're weak.
Yep. Bitter, maybe bitter, and not. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for calling in and sharing your perspective, and we'll keep going from here. Anything else?
Nope, that's it. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Okay, bye.
Okay, I think this has been a long one, so so glad that we've been able to share that discussion and some of these perspectives. I do have to go ahead and close things down now. So until next time, we'll probably explore a little bit of the story before Brian Hale's response, the story of the indecent proposals and the consequences for women who had their names smeared through the mud when they rejected Joseph Smith's proposal and went public about it. So until next time, this is Talk on Things and Stuff. Bye now.